It is finally time. The Operation Sports Full Minors rosters dropped a couple days ago, and I have spent the last couple days setting up the franchise and recording and editing, and now we are ready to actually start the series here on MLB The Show 22 with the Cincinnati Reds. For those of you who are new to this channel, I have been doing these franchise videos since 2015. Last year was the first MLB The Show series that I actually totally skipped, and then 2020's was a Rangers series that was very short-lived, all due to for lack of a better phrase, I basically fell out of love with baseball. I can't even really pinpoint a certain thing that caused me to stop caring about baseball. I mean, the state of sports in general in 2020 probably had something to do with it, but I'm also not one of these delusional losers who's just constantly just like, baseball sucks, because it's not the exact same way it was when I was a kid. I mean, I'm 26, and there's not a single thing in this world that's the same as when I was a kid. But anyways, the important thing is that I am back to being a baseball degenerate, and that leads me to this series with the Cincinnati Reds. And in case you were unaware, the Reds, they're bad. I mean, I picked the Reds because they had a bad offseason and blew up their whole team, but I mean, I did not expect them to be this bad heading into the 2022 season. Now, when I do pick a team for a series, I tend to follow that team a little bit more closely, mainly because of equipment stuff. I like to, make sure that my guys have the right equipment on and, just get some ideas for possible stuff to implement throughout the series, because I hate it when my guys look the same. I hate it when they look like generic baseball player one. So lucky for me, that means that I've watched actually quite a bit of Reds baseball this year, so I know firsthand that they are a bad baseball team. I even watched the game they won the other day against the Pirates in the first game of that doubleheader, where the Pirates had Josh Van Meter catching, who hasn't caught since he was like 15 years old. But anyways, that's all getting into in real life stuff. What you are here for is this series where it is me running the Reds and not Castellini. Now, in the team reveal video for this series, I did hint at some small ball storylines, and that is true. We are going to be implementing some more small ball stuff, much more small ball stuff than you would usually see from me as a guy who is a big analytics guy. But we're also not going to be just completely throwing everything smart out the window and just being like, we're just going to be dumb baseball guys just for the heck of it. We're not doing that. It's more so, we're trying to find the new market inefficiencies. We're trying to, they're zigging, we're zagging sort of style. So if there just happens to be a guy in our series who's a high power, high discipline, three-sure outcome player, am I going to be like, oh, this guy's hitting for us, let's get rid of him because he doesn't fit our style? No. But am I going to go out and prioritize these players so heavily and just completely throw the other guys to the side? Also no. We are going to be going out there and trying to seek these guys that other teams don't really care about anymore, these high contact, slap the ball over the field sort of guys, Jeff McNeil types. Stephen Kwan, if you will. But really the main thing that I want to bring to this team is speed. I want speed. Up and down the lineup, we want guys who can swipe bags, go first to third on singles. We're definitely going to be bunting more than I ever have in a series, mainly because I usually bunt about 0 times in a series unless there's a pitcher at the plate, which isn't a thing anymore, which is good for me. Going to be seeing a lot more hit and runs, big focus on defense as well. We're not going to be having any big oafs out there in left field or third base just because they can hit and they're just okay enough to pass by. That's no longer a thing with the mentality. We want to make sure we have great defenders at every position. As far as pitching goes, the focus is pretty much just anybody good. I mean, if that happens to be just loading up on a bunch of sinker-slider guys, then let's just load up a bunch of sinker-slider guys, but I'm not going to go out there and try to just be like, oh, I want a guy who's throwing 88 because that's what I'm looking for. No, we're just going to go out there and try to find good players. Obviously, all this is easier said than done, and obviously our current roster is not really conducive to any of this because our current roster is basically only good for losing games. So speaking of the roster, let's jump straight in, a little bit of a rundown of what our team is going to be looking like heading into this 2022 campaign. So the rotation, 1 to 5 on opening day, it's going to be Tyler Mahle getting the ball. After him, it's Reaver San Martin, Vladimir Gutierrez, and then our top 1 and 2 prospects and Hunter Green, and Nick Lodolo. In the bullpen, we've got former Rockies starter Jeff Hoffman, longtime Tigers reliever Buck Farmer, the Ohio kid Art Warren, Justin Wilson, the lone left-hander, Hunter Strickland, Tony Santillan, Luis Sessa, and then Lucas Sims. While the lineups against right-handed pitching is leading off left field Jake Fraley, second baseman Jonathan India, right field Tyler Naquin, first base Joey Votto, DH Tommy Pham, third base Mike Moustakas, catching Tyler Stevenson, shortstop Kyle Farmer, center field Nick Senzel, and then against lefties it's India at second, Farmer at short, Stevenson at third in the third hole catching. The cleanup hitter in right field is Aquino as he plays right against lefties as Naquin cannot hit against lefties. Votto at first, Pham in left, Moustakas DHing, and then Brandon Drury is the third baseman, while in center field rounding things out is Nick Senzel once again. While the two main guys who are mainly just bench pieces are Colin Moran, first baseman, third baseman, left fielder type, and then Aramis Garcia is the backup catcher. You may also notice that there are guys who started the year on the IL who are not on the opening day roster for us, but Lucas Sims, who also was on the IL to start the season, is on our roster, and that's because when I was manually giving the injuries to these players, I reached the max amount of manual injuries that I can give, so I decided that Sims would be the odd man out because he's the only one in real life that's already come back. He only missed a few games, so we're just going to roll with him on the roster, and you don't get to see Alexis Diaz on the opening day roster, so congratulations for you. But now just getting a little bit more in depth on some of the key guys on this roster. On the pitching side of things, we've got Luis Castillo. Everybody knows Luis Castillo, one of the better pitchers in baseball, insane changeup. He is starting the year on the IL with shoulder soreness. Now I know it says shoulder separation in game. That's just so I could get the days correct. It only lets you put a certain amount of days on a certain amount of injuries. So I wanted to make sure that I had the right amount of days on the injuries. So that's why it says separation in game. But the important thing is that he should be back in early May. So he's only going to miss about a month of the season. And the thing with Castillo is that he is most likely going to be one of the guys that we trade, if not this season, then definitely in the offseason or next season. He's 29 years old. He just doesn't fit into the timeline of when we'll be good again. I mean, by the time this team is good, he'll be 31, 32 years old. So, not really what we're looking for there. We also got TJ Antone, who him and Sims are definitely our best relievers. Unfortunately, Antone is going to be missing the entire season due to Tommy John surgery, so we will not be seeing him until 2023. And then we've also got Mike Minor, who is another guy starting the year on the IL with shoulder soreness, listed as shoulder separation. Acquired and swapped for Amir Garrett to Kansas City. He's also another guy we will be looking to deal at the trade deadline. He is on a one-year deal, so we would be stupid not to try to get rid of him. He's a 30-plus-year-old starter on a one-year deal. Obviously, that's the entire reason we have him, is to try to trade him. Did not have a great 2021 with Kansas City, nor was he good in the short 2020 season with Oakland, so we are hoping that he can put up some decent numbers as trade bait for us, and we are able to get something from him out of the deadline. So then we move on to Justin Dunn, who is another one of our starters on the IL. This is the last one. Believe me, I'm tired of going through these IL guys, but he is on the IL to start the year. He actually does have a shoulder strain. Probably going to miss the whole first half of the year, but the second half should be interesting because he is actually a guy who I am interested in having. He was acquired in the Jesse Winker, Eugenio Suarez trade to Seattle. He was one of the returning pieces. I actually find him to be quite interesting because he is still pretty young. He's very good at limiting hits. He's got some nasty breaking stuff. He's just a bit wild, which could come back to bite him in the starting rotation, but even if he doesn't work as a starter for us, I would be more than willing to move him to the bullpen and turn him into just a wild, hard-throwing, nasty stuff guy in the bullpen because he definitely has the capabilities to do that, and there are plenty of guys like that who succeed in the bullpen. And then there's Tyler Mahle, who we already know as our number one starter to open the season. He had a very solid 2021 campaign, looking to keep that going for us. Now, these next two starters are actually guys that I would normally do prospect profiles on, as they are the organization's number 1 and number 2 prospects, but they're already on the Major League roster to start the season. So Nick Lodolo, 24-year-old left-handed pitcher. He was the 7th overall pick out of TCU in 2019. He is the number 2 Cincinnati prospect. Not a hard thrower by any means, definitely finesse lefty sort of guy. A potential, very interesting to see what he can be able to do for us. And then we've got Hunter Green, who is the number 1 Cincinnati prospect, and unless you've been living under a rock, you probably know who Hunter Green is. Guy throws insanely hard, averages 100 miles an hour on his fastball. It just so happens he also happens to throw the straightest fastball in the big leagues, which if you know anything about pitching, you don't want to be throwing straight fastballs because they get barreled up. He's also definitely going to be having some control issues in-game, so we'll have to be getting a bit creative with how to use him. Now, as far as some of the interesting relievers on the team, we have Tony Santillan. Warms up the loud and heavy by Cody Jinks, so you know he's from Texas and he means business. Then you got Art Warren. I mentioned he is a Ohio guy to the core. Went to high school in Napoleon, Ohio. Went to the University of Cincinnati. Was a Bearcat before transferring to Ashland University in Ashland, Ohio, where he was drafted in the 23rd round by the Seattle Mariners in 2015. He's a hard thrower, wipeout slider. Definitely could be a potential dude in our pen. Then we've also got Jeff Hoffman, former starter with the Rockies, upstate New York guy. Theme with this team is guys who you really haven't thought of in a couple years. You know, if you follow baseball, but you don't follow it too closely, and you're like, oh, I remember this guy was a top prospect a couple years ago, or I remember this guy was a key player on this team a couple years ago. Wonder what he's up to these days. The answer is he's on the Reds. Every single one of them, they're on the Reds. Then down in the minors, with some options we could possibly call up throughout the year, we've got guys like Ross Detweiler, decent lefty to have in the organization. I would expect to see him in the bigs at some point. Ryan Hendricks throws hard, lots of break on his breaking stuff. We got Kyle Zimmer, who is another guy who is now on the Reds and used to be a top prospect. 5th overall pick in 2012 by Kansas City. Just hasn't really panned out, mainly due to injuries, but he also hasn't been good since reinventing himself as a reliever with the driveline guys. We also got Zach Godley, who was listed as a reliever, but I'm probably going to change to a starter because he could actually be an interesting innings eater in the rotation. He has had some solid seasons as a starter with Arizona in the past, so he does have the potential to do that. It's just the past couple seasons, he has not really pitched that much. I don't know if that's because he's been in AAA or if he's been hurt. I probably should do more research on that, but past couple years hasn't had many innings in the bigs. Maybe this year that'll change and he gets to maybe crack our rotation at some point if guys like San Martin or Gutierrez really don't perform for us. And now on to the hitters, starting things off with the hitter that everybody cares about, Joey Votto. Obviously had his big power resurgence last season. In real life, he's putting up all-time bad numbers to start the year. I'm hoping he does not do quite that badly for us. I don't expect him to be that good because he's not very good against lefties in this game. Could possibly be like a platoon guy at some point once we get a better option to first base, but right now, definitely Joey Votto is one of our better bats. So hoping he can still put up some decent power numbers for us. He has this year and then one more year on his deal, and I'm not going to trade Joey Votto. I'm just not going to do that. I think he should retire as a Red, even though, what loyalty should he ever show to the Reds? So basically, I'm just hoping that he retires at the end of this contract and I don't have to, possibly consider signing a 40-year-old Joey Votto to like a 1-year deal or something like that. Mike Moustakas, on the other hand, will definitely be traded. It'll either be this year or next year. He's also on a deal where he's signed through this year and then the next. He has not been good with Cincinnati since signing with them, so I'm going to need him to put up some numbers this season and boost that trade value so I could possibly get him at the deadline in the offseason or next season at some point. Then we've got Tommy Pham, who is more trade bait. I like Pham quite a lot. He's 34 years old, though, and on a 1-year deal, so I would be stupid not to trade him. He's a good hitter, not a great fielder at this point in his career, but his stealing and base running definitely fits with what we want to do. It's just his age and his contract just don't fit with what we want to do. So you may be thinking, damn, Jersey, is there anybody on this team you want to keep? And yes, Jonathan India, for example. This is a guy I want to keep. Last year's NL Rookie of the Year, can hit, run a little bit. Not the best defender, but he is only 25 years old, so still a key piece going for us going forward. Tyler Stevenson, also 25 years old, should be a big bat for us in our lineup. 6'4", 225, so a big catcher. Could potentially be moved to first base once Vada retires and we get a better defensive catcher to be our catcher. But as of right now, he is our catcher. Then we've also got Nick Senzel. Now, unfortunately, he is not him. Nick Senzel, former top prospect for the Reds, can play all over the field, got some good speed. Unfortunately, just can't really hit at all, and he's probably not a center fielder. He kind of reminds me a bit of Nick Solak from the Rangers series, or at least where Nick Solak's ratings were in that game. Kind of just, meh hitting across the board, but he does have the capability of, if he puts up some good numbers, those numbers could go up quite a bit, and he gets a good ratings boost, and then all of a sudden, he's a potential dude in the lineup. But if he doesn't hit, he's probably not sticking around as anything more than a super utility bench guy. Jake Fraley, though, is a guy who I like quite a bit. He was acquired in the Jesse Winker, Eugenio Suarez trade. And if you take one look at his ratings, it is obvious why I like him. He can get on base. Huge, very good plate discipline rating. It's why he's my leadoff guy against right-handed pitching. Also got a little bit of speed with some stolen base capabilities. He can't hit at all against lefties. Bad defensive outfielder as well. I actually docked down his defensive ratings because they had him like mid-70 fielding reaction, and he's genuinely one of the worst outfielders in baseball, so we're not going to let that fly. And then another interesting guy in the system, Kyle Farmer, except he's more interesting in the the Reds really think this guy's a shortstop sense. He's also another guy who you see and you're like, wait a minute, isn't that the catcher from the Dodgers organization? And yes, that is him. It's just last year the Reds thought that they could go into the season without a shortstop, so they decided to play Eugenio Suarez at shortstop instead, knowing that he's not a shortstop. And then when that backfired, they decided, hey, let's just settle on this guy to be the shortstop instead, and that guy just happened to be Kyle Farmer, a catcher. So it turns out he's also not a very good shortstop. I docked his defensive rating down a little bit as well because the game had him much better than he is. And one thing I've noticed in real life, and it's kind of a little bit of a running joke between me and my friends, is the things that like broadcast of bad teams, the things they talk about throughout the season. I've watched a decent amount of Oakland games so far, a decent amount of Reds games, like I've said, and the Oakland broadcast, they just love to be like, Christian Pache, man, look at the guy. He's gonna hit eventually, right? Look at him. He's put together. He's gonna hit eventually. And it's just, you guys gotta talk about something, I guess. While the Reds broadcast, their thing is just constantly being like, man, Kyle Farmer's a great guy. Every time I see Kyle Farmer, it puts a smile on my face. He's a great guy. Love Kyle Farmer, great guy. Unfortunately, not very good at baseball. Also, just much older than we need, so he's not a guy that really fits our timeline either. Now on to arguably the most interesting guy in the entire organization, at least in my mind. It is Aristides Aquino. You may remember him from back in 2019 when they first called him up, and it seemed like every day it was like Aquino hit 2 home runs for the Reds. Jeez. I started calling him Daddy Longlegs because in every clip it seemed like his body was just 90% legs. Unfortunately, since that 2019 run, he has basically revealed himself to be Pedro Serrano in Major League when he first shows up to training camp, when he first shows up to spring training. And he's like, man, this guy, he hits a ton. Why didn't anybody else pick up on him? And then they throw him the breaking balls, and it's just like, okay. Yeah, that's basically who Aquino is. Absolute cannon of an arm in right field, too. A little bit of speed. So if he can be a guy who figures it out for us, definitely a good guy to have as our potential big bopper in the lineup. I also dropped his potential rating down to a C because it was a B, because even though he's very intriguing, he's definitely not a B potential anymore. Then we have Donovan Solano, who is starting the year on the IL with a strained hamstring. He is on a 1-year deal, definitely trade bait guy. Love his contact hitting, love his hitting ratings, could be a great piece for a competitive team. Unfortunately, we are not that, so he can go be that for someone else when I trade him at the deadline. Also, ideally, with a player with his contact and vision ratings, you also want that guy to be like either a really good fielder or really good, or he has speed. You know, like having those contact ratings and then also having like 34 speed doesn't really help me too much. Now, as for some guys down in the minors, the most interesting guy in the minors, at least for me, is Albert Almora Jr., who is another one of those guys that you're just like, ah, man, whatever happened to Almora Jr. from the Cubs? Well, he's on the Reds now. That's where he is. I also forgot, but I am going to drop his potential down to a C because he also is definitely not a B potential anymore. And he's probably going to be one of the first guys that I look to call up when we do need an outfielder at some point. But we do have a couple other options in the outfield in the minors. There's also TJ Friedl, I probably should have looked that up, but if his bat develops a bit more, he could be a solid outfielder for us. He's got some decent ratings, definitely has the speed that I'm looking for, got some great hair too, so that's definitely a plus. Jake Bauers, another one of those, what happened to that guy? He's on the Reds. Jake Bauers, or in the Reds organization at least. Lefty, very high discipline. Could be somebody I look at eventually. And then we got Max Schrock. Schrock the Rock. He's on the IL to start the season. Could be up at some point. Love his bat against right-handed pitching as like a second base, third baseman, corner outfielder guy. Alejo Lopez, switch hitter, okay contact, solid defender, good speed. Definitely a guy I could see up in the big leagues at some point for us. And then last but not least is the super utility man, Taylor Motter. Very average hitting skills across the board. Like I said, super utility guy, can play literally everywhere. Very useful to have a guy like that in the org. And also, very good flow. And now before we wrap this up, I do want to just mention that I did go and download what I thought was the best versions of our AAA and AA ballparks out there. So for the Louisville Bats and the Chattanooga Lookouts, I could go and do that for every single team, but I just really don't care enough to do that. Maybe I will at some point, but for now, we at least have our team's stadiums in the game. So with that being said, that's going to wrap things up here for this edition, the first edition of the Cincinnati Reds franchise here on MLB The Show 22. The next episode will be opening day plus 2 other games. So it's opening day against the Chicago Cubs, Tyler Mahle going off against Marcus Stroman. I've been your host, Jerseyborn, and I am saying, Zach Bryan album right around the corner.